I'm always a little skeptical when I see a gaming PC that's marketed with a big-name GPU and a high-end CPU, because the cheap pre-built rigs that flood the market often end up being a disappointment once you get them home. You get the excitement of unboxing a shiny tower, only to discover that the cooling is a nightmare, the storage is half the size you expected, or the system can't actually hold a steady 144 frames per second in the titles you care about. That's why I spent a few days digging into the Skytech Azure 3, looking at the specs, reading the few user comments I could find, and watching some gameplay footage before I hit record. If you want the product details on Amazon, the link is in the description. The first thing I thought about was the kind of gamer who would actually consider a pre-built these days. Most serious players have already built their own machines or know exactly what they need, but there's still a sizable crowd that wants the performance of a high-end rig without the hassle of picking parts, wiring everything up, and troubleshooting BIOS settings. The Azure 3 tries to fill that niche. It's pitched as a ready-to-play system that can handle the latest titles at high settings, and the headline numbers look impressive. A Ryzen 7 7700 processor that can boost up to 5.3 GHz, an RTX 5070 with 12 GB of GDDR7 memory, 32 GB of DDR5 6000 RAM, and a 1 TB Gen 4 NVMe SSD. On paper, that's a lot of horsepower. $4 $600 $800, depending on where you find it. What matters most once you actually plug this thing in is how the components work together in a real-world environment. In practice, the RTX 5070 is the most tangible upgrade you'll feel. In games like Cyberpunk 2077 or Elden Ring, the card can hold 1080p ultra settings at well over 70 frames per second, and if you drop down to 1440p you'll still be comfortably in the 6070 frames per second range even with ray tracing turned on. That's a solid step up from a mid-range GTX 1660 or RTX 3060 you might find in cheaper builds. The 32 GB of DDR5 isn't just a marketing flex either. It removes the occasional stutter you see when you're streaming while gaming, because the system never runs out of RAM even with a handful of background apps. The storage solution is another practical win. A 1 TB Gen 4 NVMe SSD delivers raw speeds that translate to near-instant load times in most modern titles. I ran a few load screen tests in Witcher 3, and the difference between a typical SATA SSD and this drive was roughly a second or two. For someone who hates waiting for worlds to load, that's a noticeable quality of life improvement. Now, the cooler. Skytech advertises a high-performance air cooler, and that's a point that has to be examined beyond the buzzwords. The cooler is capable of keeping the Ryzen 7 at around 70 C under sustained load, which is decent for a metal case with decent airflow. However, if you're planning on overclocking beyond the built-in boost, the temperatures can creep up into the high 80s, and the fans become louder. For most gamers who will stick to stock or modest overclocks, the cooler does the job, but it's not a silent room setup. I'd recommend positioning the case where the exhaust fan points toward a wall or a vent, just to keep the ambient noise down when you're in the middle of a raid. One hidden trade-off is the power supply. The 850W gold-rated unit is generous, and it gives you headroom if you ever want to upgrade the GPU or add extra drives. The downside is that the PSU is a sealed unit with a single fan, so it can add a faint hum under heavy load. It's not a deal-breaker, but if you're a noise-sensitive user, you might notice it when the GPU is pushing its limits in a demanding title. Connectivity is fairly standard but worth mentioning. The machine includes Wi-Fi 5, 802.11 AC, and a gigabit Ethernet port, which is fine for most households. But if you have a newer Wi-Fi 6 router you won't be taking full advantage of that bandwidth. There's also a handful of USB-A ports and a USB-C combo on the front, which is useful for plugging in a headset or flash drive without reaching behind the case. Who should buy the Skytech Azure 3? If you're a gamer Who wants a machine that can run the latest AAA titles at 1440p with high graphics settings, wants fast load times, and doesn't want to spend a weekend building a PC? This is a solid option. It also fits well for streamers who need extra RAM for multitasking, as the 32GB lets you run OBS, a chat window, and the game itself without hitting a bottleneck. The price point is higher than a DIY build with similar parts, but you're paying for the convenience of a fully assembled system, a pre-installed Windows 11, and a warranty that covers the whole bundle. Who should skip it? If you're a purist who wants to handpick every component, or if you already have a decent CPU and just need a GPU upgrade, this rig is overkill. Likewise, if you're hunting for an ultra-quiet,